Yeah, my name is Fiona Barnett, and I am a PhD student at, can everybody hear me in the back? I know it's the end. Louder? Okay. I know it's the last day and it's kind of warm in here, so we'll get through it together. So I'm a PhD student at Duke University, and I also run the HASTAC Scholars Program, as well as work more generally on the HASTAC website and building the HASTAC community. I really want to thank Anne Alexander, I think she just stepped out, and SMKE staff and the Crash staff who kindly invited me here, as I think one of the oldest forms of social media knowledge exchange, which are these meetings with fleshy avatars. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity, I think, to understand the programs and projects that you've been working on and the ways that they map and don't map onto sort of similar examples that I'm more familiar with in the US and Canada. So I'm going to have a couple parts of the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about HASTAC in general. I think some of you know, I recognize some of your fleshy avatars from your digital avatars on the site, but I think a lot of people always say to me, what is it that HASTAC does? And they don't like it when I say, I don't really know, because it's so many things. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit more of an overview on what it is we think we're doing, and on the HASTAC Scholars Program more specifically. And then wrap up the conference with a few sort of main themes and questions. If I'm talking too fast with a weird accent, just let me know and I will slow down. So one thing is that my own work focuses a lot on building academic communities, but I've become more and more interested in how that maps onto other kinds of cultural communities and other kinds of institutions trying to engage and collaborate with their sometimes called followers, and I think more likely we're developing into an understanding of thinking of them as community. And we were just talking a little bit about that in the last session, about the difference between broadcasting and engaging the fellow people in your community. So a lot of here, what I'm going to be talking about is building academic community, but I think the principles are still the same for many of you who are trying to build these other kinds of cultural and heritage communities. So HASTAC is, here's my info, it'll be there at the end as well. I affectionately call myself a nerd herder because it's mostly what I do is figure out how to get nerds to do things together in various ways and respond to what it is they're interested in and sort of pull that out as well as direct them. And so some of the scholars at some point dubbed me the nerd herder. So this is an intro to herding nerds. So HASTAC is pronounced haystack, as in needle in thee, and it stands for Humanities, Arts, Sciences, Technology, Alliance, and Collaboratory. It used to be Advanced Collaboratory, but then nobody knew what an unadvanced collaboratory was, least of all us. And so for the 10th anniversary of HASTAC, we decided to change the name. And this is a good example of it started off as a little bit of an inside joke about bringing a lot of different kinds of disciplines together, and then it stuck and kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And so when you're naming projects, think about that, what it could turn into, because people often wonder, why we smush so many things together. And one is, what else would we call it? And it just started off as a very, very, very tiny idea between a few people at a meeting, and had no idea it would grow into this. So one of our taglines is learning the future together. And as I said, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary in a field that really seems to be ramping up quite quickly. And we're absolutely continually amazed and so proud that we've built a very sustainable, nimble, and ever-evolving community. Since SMKE is also trying to build this community of scholars, and many of you are developing community in your own projects, Anne asked me to speak a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts behind the development of HASTAC and the ongoing sustenance of it, and to offer some tips that might help shape your own work. We often say that HASTAC isn't just a network, although that is literally true, but we say it's a network of networks, because we like to bring together people from a lot of various types of departments, types of institutions, sites of learning, students, people who are interested in educational reform, pedagogical possibilities, and provide a platform and a way to communicate and think through some of these questions together. So some of the questions that the website engages with. Uh-oh, the little images didn't come. Well, there, you can join us there. I think the server was having a hard time pulling some of the bigger images in. It's okay.
Put it up on.
It's okay. You guys can look at haystack.org on your computers. And so if you're not on Haystack already, people often ask me, how do I join? And at the top right, where that little arrow would be pointing to, it says join here. And you can click on that and sign in with a username. It's free. There are no dues. There are no requirements. You have to fill out a little bit of basic biographical information, and voila, you are now a member. And some of the questions that we think through are things like, how do we use technologies in our teaching and learning, not only to replace traditional media and assignments, but also to address fundamentally new student approaches, needs, and possibilities, and actually new ways of thinking. We also think about how is publishing changing in this digital world, and what does this mean for things like peer reviewing, open access, and support for projects beyond book manuscripts. And we addressed some of this yesterday, and there was a Twitter conversation about the growing field of altmetrics and how you keep track of some of your academic and intellectual work beyond literal citations of published material. We also think about what kinds of projects and ideas are considered to be part of things like digital humanities, new media arts, or science and technology studies, and how are these delineations useful or outdated, and how do they reimagine, how can we reimagine specific notions of culture, aesthetics, science, the body, or communication by rethinking some of these questions with people outside of our own discipline. What might our research and technology design and thinking look like if we took seriously these momentous opportunities and not just fears posed by the digital era? But I think the thing that we're really proud of at HASTAC is that we don't just sort of fetishize technology for technology's sake. And I think many times, as I'm going to talk about later today, some of our best projects have been very low budget and low tech projects that bring people together. So we, I think, very crucially understand ourselves as not a few people behind the scenes providing a service for a large community, which I think can often feel like people are broadcasting out to a community. We think of ourselves as part of the community and trying to develop what the community itself wants. And so we say that the strength of the community is literally the strength of the community, and by that we mean we provide some of the infrastructure behind it, but we have 4, maybe now 4.5 full-time people on Haystack. I'm a very, very, very part-time graduate student on it. People often think we have a massive staff behind the scenes, and that's very not true. And so all of the energy that comes from the projects that stem from Haystack are from the community members themselves. So what is it that Haystack does? To put it simply, the most visible face of Haystack is our website. I explain it to my mom like it's a cross between an academic newspaper, a community website, Facebook, and an old-fashioned classroom blackboard. Anybody can join, as I said, and you automatically, by joining, gain the opportunity to blog, comment on other blogs, join a topical group, create a group, post events, job ads, list funding opportunities, send private messages, and the list goes on. We also administer the Digital Media and Learning Competition, which is an annual competition to develop new projects on a given topic. And this year it was on badges, which sometimes gets a bad name, but I think it's rethinking what assessment means when learning is different. And badges is one way of thinking about that. We also have an annual conference, and we just wrapped up our 10th anniversary in Toronto. We are hoping the next one will be in Peru. And with that, we are working with the ministers of culture in South and Central America to get funding for people from each of their countries to come to Peru. We're also trying to build alliances with people in Africa to sort of coalesce a stronger conversation with the Global South, which is an area that, Haystack and I think a lot of our other networks have traditionally not been as strong in. But Haystack is also a number of workshops organized on many campuses, journal articles that are spearheaded from the site, conference panels that are organized, syllabi that are developed, dissertations that are being written digitally. And for a lot of people that find a home on Haystack, they often say they literally have no place else like it. They're often the technology person in the humanities department, or the humanist in a technology department, or they're some weird person in an information school, or they are the person thinking about theory within a more sort of advertising and marketing type of department. So they often feel like a bit of an outcast, and for younger scholars have not had much mentorship in the arena they are hoping to develop in or feel sort of a kinship with. And it's been a place for people to really develop their own work, as we've been talking about in the last couple days, by blogging. And I think one of the differences is with HASTAC, we're not just on one institution, right? Like, it's not just your department's website. And it's not your own website, although we also encourage you to cross-post. So this means it's a whole new set of eyeballs. We get, thousands of viewers a day, which is very different than most people's personal blogs, and a whole set of tagging and grouping tools so that new people will be brought to your material in vastly different ways than if it was just on your own blog. And as I said a second ago, you're absolutely welcome. I know a lot of you blog already, and people don't want to have more labor to do, which I totally understand. And it's very simply solved by, you can cross-post, and you can say cross-posted from my blog at XYZ at the bottom, and it'll be a whole new audience, I'm sure. One thing is that as we've continued to grow, it's become really obvious that it's simply not true. If you build it, they will come. And that notion doesn't also allow for understanding of who is doing the building, for whom, and for what purpose. Sometimes we've built features on the site and people come to them. And sometimes we haven't built a certain capacity for the site, and the participants start acting as though it's there, and they sort of like cobble together other ways of doing that thing. And then a few other times we build something and nobody ever comes to that part. And so it's been an experiment as we've been going to develop this community, and as we've been refining it and updating it, and we've had to draw in examples and case studies from a lot of other, there's nothing else like HASTAC, right? Like, there's no other comparable place. So we have to draw sort of comparisons and learn from other types of online communities, as well as academic communities that are offline. So along with the 10th anniversary of HASTAC, this is the 5th anniversary of the HASTAC Scholars Program. And as was mentioned earlier, let's see if we can get this. This was our beautiful 10th anniversary infographic, which I will tweet out in a minute. Our director of social media developed a whole infographic with some numbers from the last 10 years, and I will try to find that and tweet it out. So this is the landing page for the HASTAC Scholars. Let's see if I can... This also gives you a general idea of what the front page looks like. And the Scholars is, a fairly significant part of the program in general. So if you click on Scholars, you'll be taken to this general site where we have a couple of featured locations on the site, as well as, let me see if I can figure this out on this funny mouse. We can highlight blogs and comments and other kinds of forums that are taking place. You can also see, you can find the scholars that you're searching for, upcoming events, tweets, et cetera, et cetera. So 6 years ago, the HASTAC Steering Committee was thinking about how to build this community more holistically, and in particular, how to really support the next generation of scholars coming up. The first year was a pilot program comprised by students, mostly of HASTAC Steering Committee members and a few advisory board members. And the program that year was directed by somebody named Erin Gentry Lamb. The first year was a total success, so they decided to expand it more broadly. And since then, it's grown to over 700 students. And this year, I think we're at 220, and we are opening up the applications for next year. And I expect every number, the applications have grown, so I expect this year we'll probably have around 250. The Scholars Program is entirely student-run, comprised of graduate and undergraduate students who are broadly interested in these areas, intersecting areas of technology, arts, humanities, and sciences. But these questions are applied and interpreted in a lot of different ways. A faculty member at the home institution sponsors these students with a $300 US scholarship or the equivalent in local currency. We also know, though, that this is really hard internationally because funding works very differently. And so we've also allowed funding in lieu of, so we like research funding or books or travel, or sometimes it's rolled into another kind of research project. And in the midst of this economic and larger higher ed funding crisis and universities being defunded, we really had to think about whether to maintain that $300, which is a very small amount of money, fellowship, or if we should try to open it up more. And we ultimately decided to keep it for now for a couple of reasons. And I think this is these are important if you're trying to develop your own community and thinking about how to bring people in and keep an active and engaged core group of people. One is that the funding acts as a speed bump into the program, and I find it discourages what I call drive-by registration, which is some programs that we start, people just sign up and then never come back, right? And that doesn't, if you think about being like the one guy out there on the dance floor dancing, you really don't want to be that guy out there at the wedding. You want to join a party where people are already dancing. And so it's better to have a smaller group of very committed and core people who are very active than it is to have a huge registration. We could have thousands of people register with 2 people blogging. It creates a very different kind of environment. It also acts somewhat contractually between the scholar and their school, so that, again, there's a lower flakiness level because they feel somewhat committed and obligated and connected, I think, to represent their school and the school's work. The work of actually getting this institution to award the $300 to a virtual or invisible, as I'm often asked to explain how they are being sponsored to deans, $300 for an invisible network. I'm like, well, it's not that invisible. And I think that part is also really important. It forces a local kind of recognition of another kind of kinship and another kind of scholarly community that's building outside of traditional academic institutions. And it offers a token, I think, finally, of recognition of the labor involved with these kinds of projects for the student, him or herself. We didn't want the Scholars Program just to be tacked onto other positions, and we wanted it very intentional and separate from other requirements. We're totally aware of labor issues in the university, and we didn't want this to be yet one more thing that students were sort of obligated to fulfill to graduate. So what do the scholars do? Let me see if I've got this one up. Here are some of the titles. I'll go back to the other one in a minute. One of the main things that the scholars do are run these interdisciplinary forums, digital forums. Several scholars are selected or invited or apply to host one of these forums. And in doing so, they present what's sort of a prompt with interdisciplinary questions around these topics. And more importantly, they invite some of the key people within their fields, plural, to participate. And we knew these forums would sort of were becoming more and more lively, and we recently tallied that some of these forums have had 30,000 visitors, and most of them have over 100 comments. And if you see the comments, they're like multi-paragraph long. So the kinds of engagements in these forums is kind of phenomenal, and they are now being used because some of these are so these topics are, like critical code studies, for example. That was a watershed moment for that field. There was no other publication on that field at that moment. And so it's since been used to justify dissertation defenses. It's been used to develop syllabi. It's been used to develop journal articles, conference panels, etc. And that it goes for all of the other panels as well, the other forums. The students are not only from about 125 different schools. We also have that many disciplinary interests involved, everybody from computer science and architects and English majors and art historians, ethnography, museum studies, learning sciences, education, math, music, etc. So they also blog about their own work, which is important, as we've been discussing over the last couple of days. And I think that really crucially for these young scholars who are developing their own voice, to have a built-in Insta community of people who will comment on your blog as well as you can comment on theirs is very different feeling than starting your own WordPress out there and just hoping that people come and tweeting out your link once in a while. It provides sort of a built-in community and people who are really ready to wrestle with some of the questions that you would like to raise. I feel like so many of the points I've been making we've all covered over the last couple of days. So one of the questions is, if you can convince all of these people to pony up $300 and you promise these students a really interdisciplinary conversation and community, how does it then happen? One of the things I want to emphasize is that even though it's happening mostly online, most of the work is not digital or instant. It takes a lot of effort behind the scenes to establish parameters and ideas, and as I've learned, enough restraint to step back also and to allow them to take charge. So one of the first myths is that it will happen organically or naturally, i.e. if you build it, they will come. But people are incredibly busy and overworked and don't have all the kind of interdisciplinary training that some of us do or that they would like to have. And so one of the things that we've helped to establish is that that the forums and the blogs and the scholars themselves, that there is interdisciplinary built into the mandate. So you can't often, when people are stressed and have many things on their plate, it's easy to just retreat to what you know, right? Retreat to your department, retreat to your discipline. But if you are hoping to provoke something else to happen, you have to build that into the mandate. It doesn't always just happen. So one of the questions has been, how do we know the Scholars Program is working? And we've done a number of informal surveys, and we're ramping up to do another one of the past 5 years. We have been told the scholars have been invited to collaborate on large digital humanities projects. They developed civic advocacy groups. They have developed workshops and have become leaders on their own campuses around these issues. They build syllabi. And many of them who have since graduated from the program have said that on the job market, their work with the Scholars Program was was a large part of their interview on the job market. People are really, at least in the US, wanting to know how you will engage with the public, and showing that you've already established a bench line for this gives you an edge, and I think allows you to talk to the kind of departments that are hiring these days. So in thinking about building academic communities, and particularly this kind of digital community where we don't already have a relationship or know each other, in the first couple of years I was thinking a lot about the Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, which I'm sure some of you have read. And it talks a lot about how the idea of community has changed in the last 300 years. And rather than based on an everyday face-to-face notion of community where you know everybody within it, a series of technology and geopolitical situations changed so that you didn't know everybody face to face, and that you then were able to have, then you imagined your connection to other people within your community rather than knowing them face to face. And this idea of being able to imagine other people reading and the same thing that you are and participating in the same conversation, even without being able to see them face to face, I think seems a really striking crystallization of this effect of distributed networks. But one thing that I've learned with the HASTAC scholars is that it's not just an imagined community, it's an imaginative community, and it's generative in that imagination. When I first started with my job with HASTAC, I was entirely aware that it was a community, but really understood my job as a series of discrete tasks. Get them registered, get them blogging, organize some forums, and keep it ticking along. Let me see this. But let me tell you, in an imagined community of 175 very eager students who work in digital media and learning, there are a lot of emails. I felt like I was handing out one fish at a time instead of teaching people how to fish. And so I was solving one problem and one crisis after the other, and I quickly realized I was working way more than full time, and this really wasn't sustainable. I also realized that as an organizer, I could never educate myself on the nuances of each of their fields and disciplines either. They were already the experts, and they were the ones representing those questions within the program. So I really shouldn't keep handing out those fish. I was just the one in charge of the fishing derby. And so one of these crucial differences I just said is thinking about them as the leaders and figuring out key moments to both establish parameters as well as step back. And I think as you develop your own projects and people working within the group with you, that's one of the key intangible moments, is figuring out how to poke just enough and prod just enough, as well as step back and let them step forward. There are no sort of magic words to offer on how to do that, but it's something to keep in mind as you're working with people who are sort of new to this, that oftentimes people need a direct invitation. People don't always know what to blog about, and I can't remember who spoke yesterday about the history blogs. Was that today? History blog? Is that you? Yeah. And how if there was a current news topic that somebody might email the professor who was researching that field and invite them to write a blog on that. And I think that that kind of personal one-to-one interaction, it often spurs that person's first step into the digital world, and then may progress after that. But they often need a little bit of a nudge. So I've tried to distill the three components into a couple of different stages. As I said, one is the nuts and bolts, how to blog, literally how to host a forum. These are the building blocks, and they can be spelled out in an FAQ or a series of detailed instructions. But the second thing is tactics and resources, both in terms of internal organization and networking with other groups. But also in terms of when to schedule forums, how to present information, and asking them to develop and identify the tactics that would work for themselves within their own disciplines. And the third thing is something like creative imagination or institutional memory. And that is one person being able to, or one person or a series of people being able to think about the long-term effects that that a program or a project has had and where that might be going, as well as how to learn from what's already happened. I think that in a lot of digital projects, they have a 2 or 3 year funding limit, and so people wrap up that project and then move on to another one. And I know that there is publishing, people publish at the end of their project, but I do wish that there was some way for people who have just wrapped up one big digital project to have a kind of consulting role with the next big project, and helping people set up the parameters, because I think there's a lot of reinventing the wheel between some of these projects. Sometimes that's a good thing, but. So one of the biggest lessons about developing this new academic community, and especially this interdisciplinary and collaborative space, is that we are really focused on bringing out voices who are not always already shouting at the loudest. And that is sort of a mandate from within the organization. And I think if there is a desire to break the so-called digital divide, it's called a whole number of things. This can't be something that you just hope for. It has to be built into the mandate and the development and the series of steps within the project. If there is already a systemic issue that's happening, things don't just get fixed. They have to be part of the project and part of the logistics within that project. So I like to say that difference is not our deficit, it's our operating system. And that also works in terms of the disciplinary fights that sometimes happen. Second thing, as I've mentioned, is experimentation. I think that and we were talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of having a plan for marketing your blog or reaching out to a community. But I think that at the end of it, there also needs to be a little bit of an ethos of experimentation. And I know that some parts of digital humanities is very much about experimentation, and sometimes I think people think that it's about implementing a series of tools. So if you're trying to develop a new project or a new community, you sometimes have to think outside the box. I mentioned this a minute ago about if you are trying to invite new voices into the field, that just getting them registered and seeing if they sink or swim isn't really a good ethos into building that community. And one-on-one interactions and inviting people to participate on certain topics will go a long way towards bringing out those voices. Sometimes people think about HASTAC as sort of outside of these institutions or fighting against these institutions, and that's absolutely not true. I mean, we could not exist without the support of these traditional universities, like we are housed in Duke, who support the literal infrastructure as well as they're supporting all of the fellowships of the HASTAC scholars. So I think when you're trying to think about structural changes, know when to fight and when to join forces and try to change that interaction itself. And finally, the main lesson I've learned is that group emails are rarely effective for getting specific actions accomplished. The listserv works in a larger capacity and gives a 100-foot level overview. But we, the people, may be an active imagining community, but it's not going to get an email response. So I want to highlight just two, let's see how we're doing on time. Two scenarios that I think demonstrate HASTAC's diversity and reach in both tools and content. One is Race After the Internet. Last year, a really important book came out called Race After the Internet, edited by Lisa Nakamura and Peter Chow-White. And it was comprised of very amazing articles, and it got almost zero take-up in the digital humanities world. There were a lot of other books, edited collections coming out around the same time, and a lot of them got airtime, and this one was just sort of like not talked about much at all. So first I was going to write the book review, and then I realized there was no way I could do that since it was so interdisciplinary. So we invited the scholars to sign up and take one chapter each based on their discipline or their interests, and write a review of that chapter in whatever disciplinary structure made sense for their publishing standards. We published that as a series of as a collection, actually as a book, so you can click through next, like each chapter, and it went through the roof. And people then started writing in with their own reviews of different chapters. It got picked up on the Chronicle of Higher Education, and now that model, the collection itself, as well as the reviews and the model of reviewing the book, is being used as a pedagogical exercise in classes. And so one of the things we learned in that is that people are so busy. If you offer them a packaged assignment to use, like a new idea on how to do something in their classroom, they will do it often. So we gave them an entire understanding of how to rethink about this book, how to think about book reviews and publishing and student engagement, and it's being used a ton. As I just saw Lisa a couple weeks ago, and she died laughing, and she said, "You won't believe what happened." I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I got royalties for my book." And so the publishers called her up and were like, "What is going on?" So we actually got free e-copies to give to people who wanted to review the book because it was helping so much. And so I think as a strictly digital humanities project, right, this is not highly complicated. But I think that's the point I wanted to make. It didn't take an overwhelming amount of time for any one person, and it didn't take a lot of sort of technological know-how, but it actually had an impact on the kind of conversation that's happening in the DH world. The second thing is an anecdote about teaching tools. I was recently named, and this is only important because of the story, as a future leader in higher education by the American Academy of Colleges and Universities, which is, you know, sort of this like formal entity. I was definitely the youngest person there. It was very weird. So they brought us to the national conference to do a panel for all of these people on the future of higher ed. And I was the only one really working on digital work. So I could see as I was talking, a lot of people in the audience were sort of chomping at the bit, ready to take my head off, because I was talking about, you know, different kinds of digital related work and workshops and et cetera, et cetera. So I was trying to engage with some of them as the best I could, but I really knew that they just kind of wanted to fight. And finally, a lady stood up and said, it's really frustrating to hear the answer to that the change in higher ed is that we have to do more. I have to learn more tools, think about more interesting assignments, keep up with new technology. I feel like I barely have time to engage with the basics as it is. We have overcrowded classrooms, no funding, no humanities center, no tech in our libraries, outdated databases, and kids who come from lower income and working class backgrounds. And I thought, at first I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do with that. And the second thing I thought was, here was a question coming from the heart. This wasn't just somebody who wanted to fight. I mean, it was a scared heart, but it was her heart. And that's something that I think that I wanted to engage with and that I could engage with. So I asked her to be more specific in what one of the sticking points was. And she said that she has to teach kids how to literally name a file, how to save a folder on the desktop, how to check spell check in Microsoft Word, and how do I expect them to learn some other tool on top of all of these? And I took a step back and I said, I think that the mistake here has been that the tool itself has to become part of the assignment. At the end of the day, is it a requirement really that the essay come in Microsoft Word? Really? Then it should be part of that process, right? For working class kids and some of the people who didn't grow up with their own computers, they may have had netbooks or they may use the computer at the library. And the whole notion of folders and hierarchical folders is very different to kids that were born in like 1998 or whenever they were born, right? And so and I told her that the best essays I ever got were when I asked my students to write me an email. I wanted the essay to be in the email. And that was the only set of essays I got, in this sort of intro class, that did not begin with things like, from the beginning of history, man has been thinking about things like love and life, right? We all get these essays with these sort of big openings. So make the tool fit the actual project. And I think to wrap up with a couple of major themes from the last few days, that this has come out again and again and again in the presentations. Matthew Barr yesterday was talking about researching the game wikis and was thinking about the astonishing accuracy and depth and breadth and sort of love within that writing outside of any kind of regulated or required writing. And Adam yesterday was talking about the museum and social media and how they're developing an audience through blogs. And earlier today, Matt was talking, as I just mentioned, about the history blogs. And again in their presentations, this idea of like the fear of abandoned blogs came up, the idea that engagement wouldn't be there, and that the tool itself wouldn't fit sort of the need and the requirement of the people trying to develop that project. And so I think two of the key parts that I want to hinge on are this idea of love and need. That was my ... There we go. Or love and tools. None of the projects work without a love for the topic, and I think that gets lost oftentimes in these discussions about tools. You can't schedule blog posts to fill a group blog if the main participants aren't sold on the idea. And you also can't... so you have to think about what the people love and want to write about, right? You can't just assign blog posts. They have to love the content and want to sit down to do it. But you also have to think about what the audience loves, and that comes back to this question of engagement. So this goes for topic as well as tool. What do they love, and where do they love to read it? Is it Twitter? Is it blogging? Is it Facebook? Is it a combination? Are they long blogs? Are they short blogs? It's going to be a series of experiments to figure out, but one size tool doesn't fit one size content. On the flip side, if you fall in love with a tool yourself, think long and hard about whether it's accomplishing what you want it to do. It might be doing something, it probably is doing something, but it might not be doing what you want it to be doing. Technology fetishism isn't just annoying, it can be counter to your own ideas. And finally, I would like to offer up a space to encourage serendipity to happen. A lot of us in this past couple days have been talking about the plans and the projects and the expectations. But I think if we all step back from our academic and cultural backgrounds, we did not sort of plan where we are now, right? Like you did not sit down one day and set out a plan and then that's how you got there and focus on your very small topic that we all focus on. And that's not true. It's because you focus on you have an inherent love and respect for these kinds of ideas. So that will come out in the work if you let it. Don't think that you have to just broadcast blank words. Let the stuff that you love come out in that, and people will come. And finally, one of the things I most loved about the past few days is people talking about their difficulties with their projects. I think that we often, especially because of funding conversations in digital humanities, focus on the success of a project and how it succeeded and accomplished certain goals. Also because some of that work then, if you are at a conference and you're presenting that work, it then gets published, right? And you want to publish success. But I think that if we are trying to invite new people into this conversation, always valorizing and highlighting the successes and sort of glossing over whatever difficulties there were, make it very difficult for new people and junior people to come into this conversation. And bringing up yesterday, I love that idea when Matt showed us the video of the interview in the game just like completely falling apart. And I thought that was amazing because this kind of thing is going to happen to all of us. And if everything goes right all the time in these research projects, you're not doing something right? So I just want to say cheers to failure and thank you so much for having me.